Hi, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the last keynote speech of the conference. And it gives me great pleasure to welcome welcome Professor Philip Fernside, who will give us, I'm sure, a very instructive and also a very well-researched approach to the study of Amazonia. As is the custom in this conference, we will give you show you a short clip on his biography. So here we go. I'll now invite Professor Fernside to give his talk. He will talk for approximately 45 minutes, and after which we will have a question and answer session. Thank you, Professor.
Okay, thank you. First of all, I'm going to be speaking about challenges for sustainable development in Brazilian Amazonia. And of course, talking about challenges, most of what I'll be talking about is not sustainable. I'm going to try and be a little more optimistic at the end. Let me first not going to work. Anyway, let me first a little advertisement for that website up there. It has much more information about all of this, not only my own publications, but 22 different controversies about Amazonia with both sides, my side and the other side, and much more information. There's something called the Amazon dossier there with information about large development projects. Just the Belo Monte Dam has more than 40,000 pages of information. So I recommend it for getting more information about all these things I'm talking about and much more. Now, sustainable development, of course, is something that there have been long debates about, and you can talk forever about what sustainable development means, but obviously it has to be both sustainable and development, and sustainable implies that it's lasting in one way or another. Brundtland's caveat about non-renewable resources notwithstanding. And to be development, it has to be in some way improving the well-being of the population. It's an important aspect. Now, it's always very important to say where one's money comes from. In my case, it's from all of these academic sources. There are no hydroelectric dams or soy companies and so forth in this list. And there's more information on that site about a big project we have there. Now, deforestation, of course, is a major problem in Amazonia. And most biodiversity, for example, doesn't survive this transformation. You lose the carbon stocks, the water cycling functions, all sorts of environmental services or ecosystem services from the forest. And the dominant land use that's replacing forest is cattle pasture. obviously has much less biodiversity, much less stock of carbon, and very few cattle. You can see it really is not what supports the population of the region, so that it has a tremendous environmental impact with very little benefit in terms of maintaining the population. Now, soybeans is another major factor in the southern part of the region especially, and obviously it also has some of the same impacts. This is deforestation for soybeans in Mato Grosso. The two tractors here pulling a chain. Forest, of course, it's not the savanna, the cerrado. There's a big myth that deforestation is not taking place for soybeans, but of course it actually is. And even when they're planted in cattle pastures, that leads to the ranchers and the pastures moving farther into the rainforest. So this is one of the major factors. Now, there are many discussions about the sustainability and the impacts of both pasture and soybeans, but let me mention this, that the price of soybeans here is very closely related to the rate of deforestation, including the decline since 2004. Now, this is very important, something that drives deforestation, and the fall of prices lowers it. Here's an econometric analysis where an index of prices explains virtually all of the decline in deforestation from 2004 to 2008, when most of the recent decline occurred. So it doesn't require governance and inspections and fines and so forth as the explanation of or moratoriums and other agreements explaining this decline through 2008. Then in 2008 something happened because deforestation kept going down and the prices recovered. And what can explain that is this resolution from the Brazilian Central Bank, which linked loans from government banks for agriculture and ranching to having a clean slate with the environmental agency. So any fines, which are rarely paid, but anything that's in the computer of the agency means you don't get loans. So that makes tremendous increase in the effectiveness of inspection and so forth without any increase in the amount of effort. Now, another major factor is hydroelectric dams. This is the Santo Antonio Dam being built on the Madeira River. Many billions of dollars or euros invested. Here's Brazil's plan for the acceleration of growth. Now, the word is growth, it's not development. These are 5-year plans. And you can see there are many dams that are planned in the Amazon region, including very controversial ones. The Marabá Dam, for example, the one close to the top of the list will displace over 40,000 people, mostly riverside dwellers, ribeirinhos. But one has to think about what is being done with the electricity. It's the first thing before one considers what are the impacts of each dam and what you should be doing about it. These are aluminum ingots in Barcarena at the mouth of the Amazon River, waiting for export. And that's basically electricity in a form that you can put in the hold of a ship and take away. So it's a question, is this a wise path for development of the Amazon? Now, this is one of the next to the worst possible option in terms of creating employment. 1.5 jobs per gigawatt hour of electricity that's consumed. So the benefits are being exported and the environmental impacts are staying in Brazil. Basically, the rest of the world is exporting their impacts to places like Brazil. The only thing worse are these iron alloy factories, which are also producing products for export with this electricity. Now, aluminum is always presented as environmentally beneficial sort of development. For example, here's a sustainable development report of the Brazilian Association of Aluminum. And you might think that those aluminum ingots were produced in sustainable agroforestry plantations by riverside dwellers, but really they're produced by hydroelectric dams. And the slogan of the Norwegian company that bought controlling interest in that aluminum factory at the mouth of the Amazon in 2010 is that aluminum is infinite. But of course, it's not infinite. It has limitations, and the main one is the environmental impacts and human impacts of the hydroelectric dams. So a lot more information in this paper that came out this year in World Development. And Brazil has many other options. It's a very fortunate country in this way. This is from the National Plan for Climate Change, that 5% of all of the electricity in Brazil is used for heating water, bath water, in electric shower heads. So Brazil is one of the only countries that does this, and of course it's incredibly inefficient. You can heat water directly with energy from the sun. And it's a Belo Monte dam worth of electricity. Now, since 2008, it's been an official goal to eliminate these shower heads, but basically nothing has been done. And there are many other options. Brazil has a tremendous coastline where you have constant winds. You could have towers on the continental shelf without destroying sand dunes on the land. And Brazil has a very large semi-arid area in northeastern Brazil with tremendous amount of insolation and few clouds and low productivity areas that could be used for solar power. It's very fortunate in terms of other options. But these are not the priorities of the government. Here, President defending hydroelectric dams and minimizing the importance of solar and wind energy. And this hasn't changed with the change of president either. And also in January, the veto of any funding in the next 5-year plan, these plans for the acceleration of growth, for renewable energies other than hydroelectric dams. So wind and solar are completely out for the next 5 years in terms of federal money. Now let's look at some of the impacts. So there's 2 dams on the Madeira River in this corner of the Amazon, on the border with Bolivia. The Santo Antonio Dam near Porto Velho, and the Jirau Dam. Now, the Madeira River is famous as one of the richest rivers in terms of fish in the world, second only to the Mekong River in Southeast Asia, both in terms of biodiversity, over 800 species, and fish production. And the centerpiece are these several species of large catfish like this. But these catfish migrate every year up the river to spawn in Bolivia and Peru, and this maintains the fish in the whole Amazon River. Now, this is a fish passage built at Santo Antonio, but unfortunately those big catfish didn't go up it because their instinct is to follow the main current of the river, not to go up a stream coming in from the side. And in the Jirau Dam, it was even less likely to work. It was much smaller passage, and it doesn't even go up to the dam itself. It ends in this big iron tank with water being pumped in, and then at intervals it's dumped in the reservoir upstream. There's much more information about this in a series of papers, but one of the important issues in terms of clean development and sustainable development is the carbon credit. Both of those dams have projects approved by the Clean Development Mechanism. Now, the only place in the climate convention, or the Kyoto Protocol, rather, where the term sustainable development appears is in Article 12 that establishes a clean development mechanism. So it's a long question about what is sustainable development, and so forth. The final decision was that it would be decided by each country for itself what sustainable development is, and of course that opens the door to everything. And then in each country there's what's called a designated national agency, or DNA, that approves all of these projects and states that they're sustainable development. Now, I spoke with the head of the DNA about this in Brazil, and basically everything is approved. That is, for example, Brazil has very general guidelines as to what sustainable development is. It says it has to produce employment. But according to the head of the agency, even if a dam produced only one job, you'd have to say it is sustainable development on the basis of employment. And also, even if you knew for sure it would wipe out all of the catfish in the Madeira River, it's still considered sustainable development. So it's a significant problem. There's much more information in those papers. And also, there's a 2-volume book that came out at the end of last year that you can get from that website in Portuguese. It has translations of all of these papers in Portuguese. Now, I mentioned the construction of the Santo Antonio Dam. There are billions of euros or dollars or whatever that are spent by these companies before they even ask for carbon credit, let alone having it approved. So obviously it's not what's called additional. It's not something that's happening only because of this carbon credit. And that means that you're having an additional impact on global warming from the countries that buy it and emit more gases. Now, these dams are always presented as the cheapest way to produce energy. That is, you can talk about all the impacts and so on and so forth, and in the end, it's the cheapest energy, so this is what gets built. But that's not the case. This paper that was published in 2014 has a review of hundreds of dams around the world, and it is the normal pattern that they cost much, much more than what is thought when the decisions are made, and it takes much longer to build them than what is thought, but that makes many of them completely uneconomic. So it's not cheap energy. Belo-Monte has already cost more than double what was thought when it was decided to build, and it's taken much longer. Same happened with the Madeira dams. And also another paper this year that shows that the Brazilian calculations of future energy use are completely bogus. What you do is project gross national product at very high rates, or most of the time at 5% per year. Brazil's gross national projects has been going down in the last couple of years. And if you do that just from the mathematics of geometrical growth, in the short time you have an astronomical amount of electricity that you need and dams. So that on both counts, it's not wise. Now, there are lots of things that are the barriers to a change in this in terms of background. One very important thing that came out in January 2013, for the first time Brazil's Supreme Electoral Court released the information on campaign donations. And the top 4 contributors in the last 10 years were exactly the big construction companies that are building dams in the Amazon. And then just in the last few months, we've had all the information that's come out about the corruption, about Belo-Monte, both from those who are paying bribes and those who were receiving the bribes on the other side. And all this is public information released by the courts that you can download from the internet, showing how the money financed the last 2 presidential campaigns. Now let's move on to another barrier. One of the forms of development that is often being promoted as sustainable is forestry management. We now have thousands of sustainable, in quotes, management projects. Now you have various problems here. One, you're harvesting these large trees that have been growing for centuries, so that you're getting the benefits right up front from all of this growth. This is a very different situation from what will happen in the future if you have a sustainable cycle going back and only harvesting what has grown while you're actually there caring for the forest and waiting. It's a very different proposition economically, because trees grow at a limited rate depending on biology, and they can't compete with other kinds of investments. So let's look at two problems. One here in the state of Mato Grosso, you have these forestry management projects, but with tremendous damage to the forest. It's very obvious. And basically, these areas then are approved for deforestation, and they turn into this. And that is then planted in soybeans. This is in the municipality of Santa Carmen, that's always on the blacklist of the environmental agency. But you can see there's virtually zero biodiversity and zero carbon stock in land prepared for soybeans. Anyway, this transition goes on. Now, looking in Acre, which is one of the places with the most forest management projects, there's an example of a large rubber plantation that had subsidies back in the 1970s. It disappeared and was abandoned for that. And then it became, it was sold as a, well, it established a forest management project and then was sold as a settlement project. And these small farmer settlements have largely been bought out by larger people. But in the back there's a huge area of forest, 84,000 hectares, managed as forest management. And supposedly you have a 30-year cycle where you go and harvest one plot, and in 30 years you come back to the first plot, and it keeps on going forever. But then it was divided into only 6 plots, so you could harvest the whole thing in only 6 years, and supposedly you have to wait 24 years before you can go back. But of course it's very unlikely that that's actually going to happen. So you have these things that may on paper be officially called sustainable management, but there's virtually no indication that that's actually what's going to happen. Now let's look at another one of the problems. Deforestation has been concentrated so far in the arc of deforestation, this crescent-shaped area in the southern and eastern parts of Amazonia. But now you have these highways that are opening up the central part of the region. And the big controversy then is the BR-319 highway, which would open up basically half of what's left of the Amazon forest in Brazil. And just earlier this year, in April, this was approved by the environmental agency, everything except actually putting down the asphalt on this road. So it would open up this area along the road, but also has all of these side roads that would carry deforesters off to all of these towns on both sides of the 2 rivers that bound the area. And one of them crosses the Purus River here and opens up that huge block of intact forest in the western part of the state of Amazonas here. So you see the road has this series of reserves that were created. It's called the armored area, a zona blindada in Portuguese. It's like armor on a tank. It's supposed to keep deforestation from perforating it and going to the other side. But then you have all those side roads that will just carry people to the other side. And this huge area, the light green, is public lands that are most vulnerable to invasion of various forms. Now, what is presented in the environmental impact study is this as the scenario for what is going to happen. This is Yellowstone National Park in the United States. You can see the Highway Department logo there. And the idea is that people drive around here, millions of tourists, and nobody cuts down a single tree. So we're going to have this happening. But this is a very strong image for me because although I've been 40 years in Brazil, in the Brazilian Amazon, I've past lives, and at one point I was a ranger naturalist in the National Park Service in the United States, in another park not far from Yellowstone, giving speeches about ecology of the park. And anyway, I know the park very well. It's a totally different world from the frontier in the Amazon, where you have illegal squatters and these these grileiros, and all these things going on. But this is the official scenario for what's going to happen. Now, in this case, it is amazing because the actual justification in terms of economic terms doesn't add up, which is to carry freight to Sao Paulo from Manaus, which is a free trade zone with factories that, with tax-free imports of components and so forth. Now, the port capacity for containers is all used for exporting goods to the rest of the world rather than other ports in Brazil. And what goes to Sao Paulo goes in trucks like this on barges to Belém and then goes by road. But it would be much cheaper, even with the present system, as compared to this new highway that is, or rebuilt highway, the 319. This is a thesis with data on the cost of transporting containers from Manaus to Sao Paulo that shows that by transporting them in ships as containers would be 37% cheaper than the current system with those barges, and if you went by the 319 highway, it would be 19% more expensive. So obviously it doesn't make sense in terms of its overall purpose. But what is analyzed in the environmental impact statement is only transport between Manaus and Porto Velho, which is very near the Santo Antonio Dam in the state of Rondônia, not going all the way to Sao Paulo. There's much more information in these papers and various others that you can get from the website there. Now, there's another factor. This, of course, is the rise of the ruralists, that is, this lobby for the large landowners. So this is Greenpeace awarding the Golden Chainsaw Award to Blairo Maggi, who is governor of the state of Mato Grosso, and Brazil's largest soybean entrepreneur, and now Minister of Agriculture. But there was a long debate about revising the forest code. You can get an idea here of how much time elapsed while this was going on. But this was changed beginning in 2011, including in 2012, basically gutting this package of laws governing deforestation and so forth. And the vote, for the first vote, was the ratio 7-to-1 against the environment to remove a lot of the restrictions. And this is in the House of Deputies, which is representation in proportion to the population. So it's very difficult to explain in normal terms because 85% of Brazil's population is urban now. So it means that the people don't have, or most of the people have no direct financial interest in being allowed to clear on steep hillsides and beside rivers and so forth. So how can their representatives vote 7-to-1 against their interests? And so at the same time you're having landslides in the mountains near Rio de Janeiro, killing hundreds of people. You had floods in northeastern Brazil and so on and so forth. And of course the logical explanation is it's the money from the soybeans and so forth that explains this. And this, this ruralist lobby is also behind various moves for amending the Constitution and laws and so forth that would limit the environmental impact licensing system, and here also the creating indigenous lands and putting the authority in the hands of the Congress, which of course is controlled by the ruralists. So this goes on. You also have this proposal to do away with the environmental licensing scheme. So these are very dangerous things given the the power that this group has. Now there's another aspect that it's important to understand, and these are the security suspension laws that began in 1964 during the military dictatorship, and they were expanded in 1992 and 2009 with other laws. But what they do is give any judge the right to overturn any decision that goes against the government and its agents. If it's something that would cause grave danger to the public economy. And of course, any hydroelectric dam, for example, is important for the public economy. So that means that virtually anything can go ahead. It's been used 14 times with the dams on the Tapajós River that already beats the record of 12 times in the case of the Belo Monte Dam. There's a lot more information in these papers here, and of course the Portuguese versions in that book. Now, let me just end with a little more positive note here. Oh, good. Okay. Say a little bit about environmental services or ecosystem services. This is, as we say in Brazil, this is a fish that I've been trying to sell now for over 30 years. but if you look at this map, this is a map of tropical forests that were still standing in 1990. You see, for example, the Atlantic forest in Brazil doesn't even appear in the map at this scale. But the Amazon forest dominates the world by far in terms of area of tropical forest, even though those forests are a bit smaller now. Now that has various implications. You have a tremendous amount of biodiversity. In fact, the Biodiversity Convention calls Brazil the world's most biodiverse country. And obviously, if you cut down the forest or if it's destroyed by climate change or other means, then you lose that. You also have a tremendous stock of carbon there, which has various roles. You have deforestation that's fast enough to be an important contribution to the global problem, although obviously fossil fuels are the main part. But the important thing is you have a tremendous amount that's still there that isn't being cleared and that could be emitted to the atmosphere, either on purpose or through these other environmental changes. And so that brings the danger of having the so-called runaway greenhouse effect that again gets out of control of human decisions if what is being emitted by forests dying, the tundra melting, and so on and so forth is more than what humans emit from fossil fuels that you can actually stop emitting on purpose. And then you have the water cycling. It's a tremendous continuous forest. It gives it a much greater role in terms of rainfall, not only in the Amazon but also in neighboring areas than in other forests in the world. So here, for example, is a simulation of what happens to the water vapor that comes into the Amazon. About 10 trillion cubic meters of water is transported in. The winds, predominant winds blow from east to west in the Amazon because of the rotation of the earth. And about half of it is transported to the south. So this is very important for rainfall in Sao Paulo, for example, also in Argentina and Paraguay, other neighboring areas. And it's especially important during the rainy season in Sao Paulo, which is December, January, and February, which is when all of the reservoirs and so forth are filled within just a few weeks. So that it's 70% of the water at that time of year. So that if this area is turned into a giant cattle pasture, that water will go out the Amazon River and not be recycled. And then there's a tremendous carbon stock. This is our most recent map from our group, which not only has the different kinds of forests, but also all these other kinds of vegetation. Over 4,000 different data points from different sources to make this. Anyway, we've been trying to improve the information on these things for a long time, but of course that's not the whole story. This is one of the main hopes, to have something that is more attractive than soybeans or cattle pasture and so forth, but it requires more than simply firming up the numbers for how much these services are and so forth. The main things that have happened, much has happened in the last 30 years. You know, the Climate Convention, the Biodiversity Convention, all of those academic studies that were mentioned in the last talk, and interest from different agencies. There's lots of progress, but the main progress in getting this environmental service as a different basis for sustaining the population is institutional, both in terms of how one managed to convert that into a monetary flow, and then what happens to the money once you get it. If it's given to the government, for example, it's probably not going to sustain very many people who are actually maintaining the forest. There are various problems, and of course they all need people working on them to find better solutions. So let me just end showing you this. This is the forest north of Manaus, where I live. In all directions, you can look, you don't see any deforestation or anything. The canopy of the forest from one of the towers that our institute has. And so it's the environmental services there in terms of fundamental things like maintaining biodiversity for both utilitarian and non-utilitarian reasons, and cycling water and maintaining carbon. There are, of course, many other environmental services, but those are things that have tremendous possibility to form a different basis for sustainable development there. So I will end there, and there's much more information on the site. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Fernside, for the depth of your analysis and your passion, because I think in all research we need passion. Sorry, it's not working. Okay? Right, so I'm sure there are a lot of people here wanting to ask questions, and what I think I will do is to start with, take 3 questions from my right and 3 questions from my left. So we'll gather the 3 questions from my right first, giving Professor Fernside the opportunity to answer them. Thank you. So, questions please from my right. Yeah, anyone?
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you for your presentation. My name is Catalina. I am working in the University of Strathclyde, and I'm originally from Colombia. And last year I had the opportunity to visit Brazil and do some research in Brazil in the Cerrado biome. For those who are not familiar with the different biomes in Brazil, there are different biomes, and one is the Amazon, which is the most famous one, but another one which is very important is the Cerrado, and it's very important in terms of provision of environmental services, because most of the waters in Brazil are coming from that region. What I was told when I was in Brazil is that 80% of in the Amazon, 80% of the land is protected in theory, and 20% can be exploited for industry, whereas in the Cerrado is the opposite. It's 80% can be exploited and 20% needs to be protected. So I just wanted to know, in your experience, like, what can you add about this whole discussion? Because if the Amazon situation is already warning, then the Cerrado region, and the situation in the Cerrado region, because it's not as protected and it's not as famous as the Amazon, then is it much more worrying, or what can you comment on that?
Well, first, thank you for sharing this beautiful experience you have and what you have been consolidating in terms of knowledge about the Amazon region. My question has to do with the illegal wood that is being taken, and if along your research in the field you have seen any good examples of how to deal with this illegal wood mafia that is in the Amazon area. So if you would have a good experience to share about how to control that.
Thank you, Professor Fernside, for this heart-wrenching talk. My question is more personal. How do you cope with this on a personal level for so many years?
Okay, thank you for those questions. The first one about the Cerrado, that's the central Brazilian savanna. Obviously, that's a very important ecosystem. It's very biodiverse. It has a significant biomass, most of which is underground. That's very important. You may remember in the first Brazilian inventory for greenhouse gas emissions, the underground biomass was not counted. Anyway, it's also very unprotected, much more so than the Amazon forest, as was mentioned. This has various origins. In fact, back in the 1970s, this was being proposed as sort of a way to avoid Amazon deforestation. And as you have agriculture, this savanna would be basically sacrificed. So there's a sacrifice zone here, letting this be turned into ranching and agriculture. Soybeans came later. That would prevent people moving into the Amazon and destroying the forest.
I don't mean to interrupt you, but I think this is causing a bit of disturbance. If you could keep your hand here.
Sorry.
Carry on, no. It's okay, carry on. It's just that.
Sorry.
Thank you. Technologies.
Okay. Anyway, so this is something that I think the people who proposed that came to regret later. And then there was also another decision, fateful decision that was made back in the end of, I guess it was about 1979. A decision that there was an evaluation made of how much it would cost to create protected areas in different places, in the Amazon rainforest and in this Cerrado savanna area. And over 60% of all of the cost projected for creating these areas was just in the Cerrado to protect a small area of it, because the land is much more expensive. It's much closer to the population centers of Brazil. It's easier to deal with agriculturally and so forth. Transportation is better, all sorts of reasons. Anyway, so the decision was made to just not create protected areas there and put the money into Amazonian ones. And of course that has also resulted in the current situation. Now, one of the problems in terms of decisions now is the allocation between very expensive small areas that are near the frontiers. It can be in the Cerrado or in that arc of deforestation in the forest part of the Amazon, where it's very expensive to protect a small area. So if you're looking for something that how to use the amount of money that's available, which is always insufficient, you can protect a huge area of Amazon rainforest far away for the same price as a very small one in this area. So if you're looking for example, carbon credit, it's on the basis of what's called additionality. That is, what would happen if you didn't have this carbon project, then you get a lot more credit by doing it right up by the deforestation frontier, even if it only protects a small area. Whereas if you are interested in a long-term issue of biodiversity, you may wind up protecting a lot more by getting a huge area that's farther away. So it's not always the case that biodiversity and carbon are sort of exactly leading to the same conclusions about what one should be doing. There's a lot of discourse about that, but it isn't always the case. And often what happens is the cerrado is what loses out. It has less biomass, it's more expensive to protect, it doesn't have as much international appeal as the Amazon rainforest has, and all sorts of reasons. So it's something that I'm sure the person who asked the question is probably working to solve. Now, on the question of illegal logging, there's a lot of illegal logging still. There have been various attempts over the years to try and control it, but it still isn't working, basically. And most of the logging is still illegal. And of course, what is illegal is not going to be from any sort of sustainable management, even just on paper. And it's also something that winds up affecting, for example, indigenous areas and various kinds of protected areas, which are much more porous to logging than they are to deforestation. So it's something that needs to be solved. There have been various campaigns arresting people at different levels. It's a sort of thing that's easily subject to corruption, and ways of using these permits for transporting the wood over and over again, and transporting wood that is coming from indigenous areas or someplace else as if it were coming from a legal area. Now, it's important to say that just legalizing it doesn't solve the problem, because, for example, in the state of Acre that I mentioned, that's the area where it's gone the farthest in terms of having legal logging, whereas it used to be almost all illegal there. Now, in the middle of Rio Branco, the capital city, you see these huge trucks full of logs in the middle of the day. Used to be those would all be going at night, sort of clandestine transport to different sawmills. But you've had an explosion of approval of these legal management plans. But the problem is that they aren't really sustainable. That is, people will promise anything just to get the permission to be able to log for the first cycle. But that doesn't mean that they're going to do it in a sustainable way, or that they're going to continue doing it in the future. So in terms of personal experience, I could say yes, I've seen a significant amount of illegal logging going on. Then the last question was, how do you cope? Well, I think that anyone has to sort of have control of their own psyche if you're going to work on these problems. And the important thing is to not be fatalistic. That is, people can be very pessimistic and think that, you know, the Amazon is going to be cut down and burned down and so forth, no matter what you do. And if you take that position, then nobody does anything. It's all lost cause anyway. And at the same time, on the other side, people who are optimists and think that the government is gaining control of governance and so forth, all these problems are taking care of themselves, and then nobody does anything that way either. So it's important to keep focused on the issues here and the action.
Thank you for that. I'll now turn to questions on my left. The first question, please. in that case, we can, there we are, I beg your pardon. There we are, please.
Well, Professor Francide, thank you for your presentation. I'm Marcelo Montaño from the University of São Paulo, Brazil. What I would want to ask you is, just like Brazil, other countries are selling the image of being sustainable countries because they had a huge or a massive percentage of their energy, for example, coming from what they call renewable sources, renewable sources. In Brazil, we have those hydroelectric energy system, and then most of them producing energy on the Amazon, from the Amazon. So my question is, do you really, or do you agree with, for example, Brazilian government when they say Brazil is a sustainable country and is contributing to the climate change and issues in the world because of the counterpart of the energy production in the Amazon? And then what would be the alternative to this production instead of being on the Amazon? All right.
Hi, thank you for the presentation. Just a quick question. The illegal logging that you were talking about, where is most of that going to? Who are the end consumers of those logs?
Thank you. Okay, first the question about hydroelectric dams and climate change. I didn't talk about this in the talk here, but that's a subject I've been working on quite a bit. Hydroelectric dams are not clean energy. They emit substantial amounts of greenhouse gases, especially methane. And dams in places like the Amazon emit more than those in other parts of the world. And so it's something that in many cases actually can emit more than what generating the same amount of electricity from natural gas, for example, would emit. And of course, very much more than if it were generated by wind or solar or some other alternative. And even those that emit less than, say, natural gas still have substantial emissions. It's not zero as is considered, for example, in the carbon projects, if you have the area of the reservoir in relation to the capacity of the turbines at a certain ratio, such as in those dams that I talked about. Anyway, this emission comes from various sources. First, you have the trees that are from the forests that are there when the dam is filled. They're usually left sticking out of the water and decay in the open air, so that's emitting carbon dioxide. And some of those large dams, there are billions of trees. It's not insignificant. Then you also have methane, which is released by decomposition in an environment without oxygen, which is what you get at the bottom of a reservoir, because the water divides into layers stratified by temperature, and the bottom water, which is colder, doesn't mix with the water at the surface. And so basically the oxygen is used up very quickly to produce CO2 with the first decomposition, and everything after that has to result in CH4 and methane, and that has various ways that it can come out into the atmosphere, either through bubbles and diffusion through the actual reservoir, which is what most of the literature on the subject talks about. But the big issue is what's coming out of the turbines and the spillways, and the water that's coming out from deeper in the reservoir where it's full of methane and it's under pressure and releases these gases. as it comes out downstream. And so the whole series of studies calculating this for various dams. And I should mention that this last report of the Intergovernmental on Climate Change, the IPCC, really changes the situation substantially, because the global warming potential, which is the conversion that's used to convert methane and the other gases into carbon dioxide equivalents, has gone up substantially, so that methane has a greater impact than what was considered before. Most of the literature has used the conversion of 21, which was in the Kyoto Protocol, based on the second report of the IPCC. That is, 1 ton of methane has the same impact as 21 tons of CO2 on global warming. That's over a 100-year time horizon. Now that number for 100 years has gone up now to 34 with the last report. But the important thing is what happened in Paris in December, where we decided that temperature has to be kept well below 2 degrees Celsius over the pre-industrial average, and should be 1.5 degrees. And that changes everything. Because before you're talking about long-term equilibrium of the concentrations in the atmosphere. That's what's in Article 2 of the Climate Convention. But now if you're talking about keeping a temperature below this threshold, what really counts is what happens in the next 20 years, not what happens 100 years from now, because we'll already have passed that by then. And that means that methane and these dams have a much greater impact on global warming than what was being considered before. And these last reports estimate for a 20-year time horizon for methane. It has a global warming potential of 86. There's 1 ton of methane equals 86 tons of CO2. So that's quadrupling the impact of dams, of the methane from dams.
Could we go to the answer to the next question, please? Because we're running out of time.
Okay. Okay, I'm being told to go on to the next question. But, but anyway, the answer then is they have a significant impact, and the rest of your question is what are the alternatives? I mean, there are lots of alternatives. I mentioned a few there. Obviously, not using the energy to export as aluminum to heat water and electric showers and so forth. Brazil also has tremendous losses in transmission lines, 20% of all the electricity, even though most of it's just short distances from Itaipu to Sao Paulo. Now you're transmitting from Belo Monte, from the Madeira River, over 4 times farther. It's a completely different story. So there are lots of alternatives. Let's go on to the next question, which was illegal logging. Where are the logs going? What?
In 2 words.
In 2 words. Okay. Is it that late? Okay. Well, most of the Amazon logs are used in Brazil. This is very important. People think of it as always being exported, but that's not the case. In terms of the value of it, the money, the most valuable species are exported, so that the money aspect has greater importance. But in terms of the volume of logs, almost all of it is used in Brazil. So it's very important in terms of being able to control it, because you don't have very much of a market difference for certified versus non-certified and so forth.
It's a very hard task because as a chair very often I think it is easy to ask people to stop, wave this 10-minute thing, but it's been very difficult with Professor Fernside here. Thank you very much. It's also, the other point of interest is that although all of us have benefited from his research analysis and perspectives, the fact is we have a very large number of delegates from Brazil, Latin America. I'm sure you felt a bit homesick, but I hope it's been made up by this wonderful talk we've had from Professor Fernside. Now, in thanking you and to show our appreciation of your presence here and your excellent work and the delivery of it, can we present you a very, very small token? It's not timber. Here we are.
Thank you, Professor Fernside, for sharing your interesting insights with us.